The moment Brielle Vance saw her own face on the front page of a financial magazine, locked in a staged kiss with a man who never once looked at her with real warmth, she felt something inside her quietly fracture, as if the last thread holding her dignity together had snapped in broad daylight. If this story touches your heart, please like, comment, share, and subscribe to our channel if you believe in kindness, forgiveness, hope, and second chances. It was supposed to be simple, almost transactional in the way powerful people like to disguise emotional danger. Brielle had been brought into the world of Cassian Whitmere not as a lover, not even as a friend, but as a carefully selected piece in a corporate image strategy designed to stabilize a billion-dollar merger between Whitmere Holdings and a European luxury investment group. Cassian was known across financial circles as untouchable in every sense of the word, brilliant, disciplined, emotionally sealed behind a reputation built from control and precision. Brielle, on the other hand, was a rising brand strategist who had once believed that authenticity could survive in boardrooms. That belief had already cost her more than she liked to admit. The penthouse where she now stood during the daylight hours felt like a glass crown floating above the city, all reflective surfaces and silent wealth. Sunlight poured through towering windows, making everything too visible, too exposed, as if even thoughts could be judged here. Cassian had insisted on the arrangement after the first meeting, after deciding her presence tested well with investors and softened his public image. The agreement had been framed as temporary, structured, and strictly professional, but nothing about the way people looked at Brielle in that space ever felt professional. They looked at her as if she were already owned by the narrative they were building. At first, the kisses were not even real enough to be called fake. They were staged moments for cameras, brief touches of lips designed under the guidance of public relations advisors who monitored angles and lighting as if emotion could be manufactured like stock prices. Brielle told herself it was harmless, just another performance in a world that thrived on illusion. But Cassian never treated it like performance. He treated it like obligation, as if each moment of closeness was a task to be completed and forgotten immediately after. Days passed in that suspended daylight world where everything was bright but nothing felt warm. Brielle began to notice small contradictions in Cassian Whitmere. The way he paused for half a second longer than necessary when she entered a room. The way his gaze occasionally softened when he thought no one was watching, only to harden again the moment he became aware of himself. The way he never allowed silence to become intimacy, always filling it with business updates, contract revisions, or distant phone calls that pulled him away from anything resembling vulnerability. The turning point came on a late morning when a group of investors arrived for a private viewing of the Whitmere lifestyle campaign. Brielle had been positioned beside Cassian like an accessory, her hand lightly held in his, their presence carefully choreographed. Cameras clicked as they enacted another version of the kiss, this one slightly longer, slightly more convincing. But in that moment, something unexpected happened. Cassian's grip on her hand tightened just slightly, not in instruction but in hesitation, as if for a fraction of a second the performance blurred into something else he did not know how to name. Later, when the investors left and the penthouse returned to its artificial calm, Brielle found herself alone in the reflection of the glass walls. She noticed how easily she had begun to disappear into the role assigned to her. Not just as a public figure in a manufactured romance, but as someone whose own identity was slowly dissolving into Cassian's narrative. It was then that she received an envelope left on the marble counter, sealed with the legal insignia of Whitmere Holdings. Inside, she found the contract amendment she had never been shown in full, the clause that defined every kiss, every touch, every public moment as strictly performative, explicitly labeled as staged emotional representation with no implication of genuine affection. The words were clinical, precise, and devastating in their simplicity. What hurt most was not the contract itself, but the realization that Cassian had known all along how easily she might begin to feel something real inside a structure designed to prevent it. That afternoon, the sunlight in the penthouse felt sharper, almost accusatory. Brielle did not confront him immediately. Instead, she observed him from a distance as he moved through meetings and calls, untouched by the emotional consequences of the world he had built. She saw a man who had mastered control so completely that even his own humanity seemed optional. And yet, in moments when he thought no one was watching, there was a heaviness in his posture that suggested something unspoken had been buried for a long time. The emotional rupture did not come with shouting or confrontation. It came quietly when Brielle removed the symbolic pieces of the arrangement, the carefully selected outfits, the public-facing jewelry, the scripted presence she had been asked to maintain. She stood in the center of the penthouse during full daylight and realized she no longer recognized the version of herself reflected in the glass. She had become part of someone else's story, and she could no longer tell where her choices ended and his expectations began. Cassian noticed her withdrawal before he understood it. For the first time, his composed exterior showed a crack of uncertainty. He approached her not as a billionaire addressing a contractual arrangement, but as a man trying to understand a shift he could not calculate. The silence between them stretched longer than usual, filled with everything neither of them had allowed to be said. Brielle finally left the penthouse that day without dramatic exit or final words. She simply stepped out into the daylight city below, carrying nothing but the realization that being chosen for appearance was not the same as being chosen for truth. The world outside felt overwhelming at first, but it was honest in a way the penthouse had never been. What she did not expect was how the absence of her presence affected Cassian Whitmere. In the days that followed, the carefully constructed public image began to wobble. Investors asked questions. Press speculated. The staged romance that had once stabilized markets now became a liability. But none of that mattered to Cassian in the way people assumed it would. What unsettled him was not the business impact, but the silence left behind where Brielle's presence used to be. He found himself replaying moments he had previously dismissed, the way she had looked at him during staged kisses, not with admiration, but with quiet searching, as if she were trying to find something real beneath his surface. For the first time in years, Cassian revisited parts of himself he had deliberately buried. He remembered a version of his life before wealth became armor, before trust became risk, before emotional distance became strategy. There had been betrayal once, long before Brielle entered his world, a loss that had taught him that vulnerability was a currency that always led to ruin. The fake relationship had been meant as a shield, not a connection. But somewhere along the way, the shield had started to feel like a cage. One afternoon, under the harsh honesty of daylight, Cassian returned to the legal documents that had defined their arrangement. He read them not as a strategist but as someone confronting the consequences of emotional avoidance. The language that once seemed harmless now felt like evidence of something deeply flawed in his way of existing. And for the first time, he understood that Brielle had not been the one acting inside a performance, he had been the one directing it, while she slowly became real inside it. He found her weeks later in a quiet part of the city, working with a small creative consultancy far removed from corporate towers. The daylight there felt different, softer, unguarded. Cassian did not arrive with demands or explanations wrapped in authority. He arrived as someone stripped of certainty. What followed was not a confrontation, but a long silence filled with recognition of harm and the fragile possibility of repair. Brielle listened as he admitted, without justification, that the arrangement had begun as strategy but had evolved into something he had not known how to stop. He did not ask her to return. He did not attempt to rebuild the illusion. Instead, he acknowledged that the most damaging part was not the staged kisses themselves, but the emotional space he had denied her within them. Forgiveness did not come immediately. It never does in stories like theirs. But something shifted in Brielle as she saw the absence of control in him for the first time. Not powerlessness, but honesty. The kind that costs more than reputation. In the weeks that followed, they did not return to the penthouse version of their lives. Instead, they began again in daylight, in spaces without glass walls or curated audiences. Cassian stepped back from parts of his public image, choosing transparency over performance. Brielle rebuilt her career away from roles that required her to become someone else's symbol. Slowly, carefully, they learned the difference between being seen and being known. The emotional resolution did not arrive as a dramatic confession or perfect reconciliation. It arrived in smaller moments of presence, shared silence that no longer felt like distance, conversations that no longer required performance, and the gradual understanding that real connection cannot survive when it is treated as a product. On a bright afternoon much like the one where everything had begun to unravel, Brielle stood once again in a high-rise building overlooking the city. This time, she was not there as part of an arrangement, but as herself. Cassian stood beside her, not as a man trying to control perception, but as someone learning how to exist without it. There was no staged kiss, no audience, no contract defining the moment. Only daylight, unfiltered and honest, settling over two people who had once mistaken proximity for truth. And in that quiet understanding, they discovered something neither wealth nor distance had ever been able to manufacture, an imperfect, unguarded beginning that did not need to be fake to feel real. If this story touched your heart, please like this video, leave a meaningful comment, share it with someone who needs hope today, and subscribe to our channel so you never miss another emotional journey.